All right, it is time to start the Oracle Class 309. Yet even more stories from the Secret City. And I'm glad to have a special guest with me today. There are some others entering the room, so I'll continue to bring them in. And remember, I want you to tell me anything that you'd like for me to include in our next class session. This is the last one of these three, but we'll do this again. And if you'll let me know uh, what you would like me to cover, I will include those stories next time. Today, we're fortunate to have Robert Burnham with us. Robert has a book that's already out called The Armageddon Secret, and he's writing another book, and he's going to be talking to us today about that book. And his books have been about and are about the untold story of Germany's atomic bomb. So I think you'll enjoy what Robert has to share with us today. And we're going to just let him get started. And Robert, you may want to say something else about yourself that I've not included that would be helpful. So please do that.
Okay, well, thank you, Ray, and thank you for the opportunity to join in on the presentation today.
And
Uh,
let me add that although Robert's doing a presentation, and you'll be seeing him and the slides, if you'll just unmute yourself and ask a question, he will answer your question. I'm sure he would not mind that at all. Okay, Robert.
Absolutely right.
Sorry
Thank
for
you.
interrupting. Go right
No,
ahead.
that's perfect. Yes. So just to back up a little bit here, yeah, my background is in the mechanical engineering, and I've been had. I'll talk a little bit more about how I got running down this trail as a certified forensic engineer and a researcher long ago to investigate more about this German atomic bomb. I'll tell you a little bit more about all that in a minute, uh, and uh, and we'll just get started here with the idea that probably all of us here on the call have been able to catch the Oppenheimer movie of a couple of years ago. I think it won 8 or 9 Academy Awards, and uh, and I've seen it a couple of times, and it continues to awe me in terms of the things that the works of man had produced in that era. And the question here is, where did Germany wind up in all of this? Obviously, Oppenheimer was very worried about the German atomic bomb, and that's what spurred he and General Groves onto these enormous undertaking to build an American atomic bomb in a very short period of time. But what worried them, let's see here, just a moment, I make sure I'm still on. Am I still on with you?
Yeah, yeah, you're doing fine. Yes.
Okay, oh, there we go. The slide wouldn't advance there, but I just got under control now.
All right.
Question is, what would have happened if this man would have gotten the atomic bomb first? We all know that would not have been a good outcome, but why did they get it? And we're about to explore that. 80 years ago this summer, the Journey of the Dead Man Desert in New Mexico. The atomic bomb was blown up for the first time there, and I had the opportunity to, a couple of years ago, to visit that spot. And on that day, the world changed forever. All other types of warfare became obsolete, and now the big question is: in any military action, will it trigger atomic war? Results have been smaller wars, unlike the 85 million that died in World War II. And after 80 years, it's still important to have this conversation about atomic weapons. What were the short term and long term moral dimensions of unleashing this force? Our train that we're riding on is passing through a strange and scary place in time. Now, how did we get to this point? Germany was off to a strong start. He had uranium, great scientists, Nazi fanatics, and he had a 3 year head start. Yet it didn't happen. We have a God in heaven. He is just and cares about what takes place in this world. Thomas Jefferson. Let's take a closer look at what happened. What saved us from this? And who were the key players? Certainly we know, let's go back a minute here. Excuse me. We knew that we had Oppenheimer, Groves, Dr. Szilard, Dr. Niels Bohr, and the Germans had Heisenberg and Diebner. I, as a researcher in this area, got started back in my college days at the University of Michigan. I was walking through the undergraduate library one day and I saw on the books shelf there, a book called The Making of the Atomic Bomb, or the German Atomic Bomb, excuse me, by David Irving. Here I said, I'm a mechanical engineer, not a nuclear engineer, but that's pretty interesting. I didn't know there was such a thing as a German atomic bomb. So I pulled the book off the shelf. I sat down at a table and read a little bit of it. I checked it out, took it home, read the rest of it over the next couple of days, and I was fascinated that Germans really were doing things about an atomic energy program. And so I started to read other things. And I read Dick Rhodes' book, who has become my friend, Making the Atomic Bomb. He won a Pulitzer Prize for that and sold millions of copies. And Robert Norris, making it racing for the bomb, and importantly, Dr. Todd Ryder, another friend of mine, a nuclear physicist from MIT and author of an amazing set of collected papers called Forgotten Creators. And Ray and I have been fortunate to be invited to a roundtable, which occurs about once a month. And we have been to 3 of these so far that Dr. Ryder organizes. And it includes about 20 people from around the world, people from England and Poland, Germany, Canada. I forget the other places, Ray, that these 20 guys are from, and we spend about 3 hours about once a month on a Zoom call talking from about many things about the German surge to a nuclear weapon and what happened and what kind of vehicles were they creating in order to deliver these atomic bombs to New York City and Washington D.C. and Chicago. And they're quite stimulating and vigorous conversations with this group of researchers, scientists, and authors, even a screenwriter in there. I visited the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics in Berlin. We'll talk about that in a minute, at least the site of. The place has been demolished, but I have been walking the streets around there. The Deutsches Museum in Munich, the Imperial War Museum in London. I've visited Madame Curie's Institut de Radium in Paris. I've been to visit you guys several times there in Oak Ridge, and had the pleasure of having Ray lead me around to visit some of the sites of atomic energy World War II development there, and those awesome works of man. And I've been to Los Alamos and Hanford, Washington, and I just mentioned I stood there at Ground Zero at the site of that first explosion. And there's been other things that I've done I won't mention here, but I just give you an idea that I didn't take this lightly, and I've been searching. And here I am in Los Alamos with two of my good friends there, Dr. Oppenheimer and General Groves. What exactly is an atomic bomb, and how do we get there on this get going down this race? This gentleman you might recognize. He maybe not, but he's the German, or rather English author H.G. Wells. He foresaw the coming of battle tanks around 1900, 1910. He was writing about battle tanks, aircraft and warfare, the sexual revolution he predicted, and he predicted the atomic bomb. And he did so in this book, The World Set Free, The Story of Mankind. And that book, he in the publicity blurb, they say the last war erupts in Europe, escalated from bloody trench warfare to world-consuming atomic holocaust. Paris engulfed uh, in an atomic maelstrom. Berlin, an ever-flaming crater. The North Sea roars past Dutch dikes and sweeps across the Low Countries. And Moscow, Chicago, Tokyo, London, and hundreds of other cities become radioactive wastelands. He wrote that in 1914, 25 years before things really got going in the quest for the atomic bomb there in Germany. December 1938, at this place, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in western uh, Berlin in the Dahlem district. And a lot of things were going on in Berlin Dahlem at that point. As I mentioned, I was walking around there. This building is long gone, but in its place stands the Max Planck Institute for Physics. And at that time in 1938, in that building stood this workbench. And it was Dr. Hahn's work table. Dr. Otto Hahn, first man to split the atom. And he did it in that building at that work table. I took this picture myself in Munich, and that's his apparatus. And in that picture there, he was performing an experiment. He took strips of pure uranium, pasted it on the inside of this, looks like a angel food cake. It actually was paraffin wax that he thought would slow down neutrons projected from that little box to the left into the uh, angel food cake, paraffin wax cake. And inside of that were pasted the strips of uranium. And he ran that experiment to see what would happen to the uranium. A few hours later, a few days later, rather, he checked it out, found that the uranium had pretty much disappeared and been replaced with a much smaller quantity of two different elements. What happened to the missing uranium? It had been turned into energy directly from matter into energy. And it happened over a period of 24 to 48 hours, not instantaneously. And thank God for those guys in that odd-looking building there, because had it happened instantaneously, it might have been a different outcome. But they just were able to kind of observe it and analyze it and figured out what had happened. And then they realized that they had released the atomic energy. But as I say, over a period of time, if they could do it quickly, it would be an atomic weapon. If the German atomic weapon can't be stopped, civilization dies. Imagine if this man got his hands on those atomic weapons and he was able to deliver them somehow to the Russian front or to the American side. He had the power of the German military behind us. And in 1934, he said, no doubt he would be using those atomic bombs. If we might be defeated, but if we are, we'll drag a world with us, a world in flames. So here they are working away at this place, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. You can see it in this picture at the extreme right with that turret top on there in the shape perhaps of the Kaiser's headgear from World War I, because he funded the development of that building over there. And the Germans eventually named it, once they started up their program, they named it the Virus House in order to, let's say, put off people who might be interested in sniffing around there. America needed a counterpunch against the Nazi bomb because the word was getting out in the scientific circles that this had been started. Roosevelt didn't start the project until mid 1942. Here we have Einstein and Dr. Leo Szilard writing a letter to Roosevelt in August 1939. And they reenacted this after the war, but this is exactly what would have happened. They wrote this letter. There's the typewriter over there in the extreme left to Einstein, and Szilard typed. Well, Einstein dictated. Mr. President, this is a genuine threat. Something must be done about it. But nothing was done for 3 years. But the Germans were about to encounter a problem, the error of consequence in January of 1941, which was, by the way, well before the American Manhattan Project had even begun. Why did they hit a barrier there in Germany? They were having problems obtaining heavy water. And at that point, that was their go-to material in order to produce plutonium to make a bomb. That January 1949 date was a turning point. Why did this happen? Could it be that the German scientists deliberately slow walked the atomic bomb program to keep it out of the hands of Hitler for obvious reasons? Could it be Hitler was distracted by the war and didn't push the project? He was rather otherwise preoccupied and didn't have good leaders to follow it. In other words, he didn't have a General Groves. He didn't have an Oppenheimer. C, maybe, could it be the German scientists made a genuine mistake? Could it be that key scientific minds had already fled Germany and didn't have enough good scientists to do it? They'd all come to the United States? Or could it be that German anti-Nazi underground, which was very active, particularly the General Ludwig Beck's Black Orchestra underground group, really was active and did made a lot of attempts to assassinate Hitler and so forth? Did they get wind of this and they conspired to derail the project by somehow deceiving the German scientists? Maybe. What was the real answer? Start with the first one. Perhaps deliberate sabotage. Dick Rhodes, on page 345 of his wonderful book over here, which I have two copies, one in northern Michigan at my home there and one here in sunny Florida. And as they're very dog-eared, both of them. In 1941, German nuclear scientist Botha concluded graphite would absorb too many neutrons to sustain a chain reaction in natural uranium. And Dick says nothing in the record indicates that this overestimate was deliberate. Now, this book is the Bible of the development of the atomic bomb. And as I mentioned, the Ford Foundation, in addition to Ford's foundation sponsoring him, he won a Pulitzer Prize for this terrific work. And so an incorrect experimental results sent them down the wrong path, at least temporarily. And 2 years later, Fermi and Szilard in America made the correct graphite circulation. 33 months later, we have Alamogordo. Remember that angel food wax? Angel food cake? Paraffin wax slowed the neutrons down enough, but didn't work well enough to make plutonium. Heavy water worked great, but it was very scarce. It was thought to be as good as heavy water, but when they actually tested it, it failed quite miserably, actually. So nothing else came close to heavy water. That is according to their flawed test. But graphite is very plentiful. There's a stack of it right there. It's used in batteries and many places in the world, and electrodes for searchlights, all kinds of places you get that graphite. But the heavy water was only being made in one place in the world at that time, is a byproduct of a fertilizer plant in Norway, and it only made about 5 pounds, 8 pounds a day of heavy water as this byproduct of electrolysis, and the Germans needed about 5 tons of heavy water in order to get an atomic reactor going. They had a long way to go with that one solitary plant that they conquered in 1940 as with their invasion of Norway in April of 1940. And heavy water has a little bit different atomic structure, an extra neutron and nucleus of the hydrogen. And the only place in the world was Norway. How about or rather, item B? The German scientists made a legitimate mistake. They sure did make a legitimate mistake. But boron strongly absorbs neutron particles and was the test sample of of uh, of carbon graphite contaminated with boron? If so, how did it get in there? Did someone sneak boron into the sample of graphite, or did they just careless, or what? I proposed this to Dick Rhodes. He said, "Robert, you are exploring fertile ground in writing about the mistake of the Germans there, because nobody really knows how that boron got in there. When Szilard and Fermi tested the graphite sample later, they ran into the same problem, but they were prescient enough to consider that there might be boron in there. So they super purified the graphite. Voila, it worked perfectly. Nobody really knows, Dick Rhodes said. Was Hitler uh, preoccupied by the war and didn't push the project? Here's an interesting picture dating from April 1943. And this is from the archives of our friend Dr. Ryder. 1943. Around this time, a confidant of Hitler wrote, "The problem of the atom splitting has been solved a long time ago. We can make use of this energy for weapons." And here's Hitler at the Reichswerk Hermann Göring, the largest metal processing company in Europe, in 1943. This is after the Battle of Stalingrad and the tremendous diversions that Hitler and his general staff and his army would have been encountering. After this, he's already over there to this place in Europe, in Linz, Austria, and he's accompanied by Dr. Diebner, who's we mentioned before was the de facto leader of the German project. He was kind of like the Oppenheimer of Germany, and as was Heisenberg. They had a mixed role there. Here's Heisenberg standing in the background. Heisenberg, the founder of quantum theory, Pulitzer Prize in 1933 for that. Fritz Strassmann, who was Dr. Hahn's cohort there in at the virus house, and this other gentleman here, another atomic researcher. What was he doing there in 1943 with SS officials, top German nuclear scientists, if he was disinterested and distracted? Next item, was there brain drain involved here? Key scientists that exited Germany in 1930s. There's some familiar names there. Edward Teller, Wolfgang Pauli, Szilard and Einstein. Here's Leo. And who stayed though? Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, James Franck, all Nobel Prize winners. Ever hear of a Geiger counter? He's there. Here's Strassmann. We just saw his picture. Manfred van Ardenne. He was a big player there in the entire project to get the German atomic bomb. Walter Bonte, he's the guy that made the mistake, also won a Nobel Prize. And Diebner and Erich Schumann. Brain drain was not their problem. Was there deception of the German scientists by the anti-Nazi underground? And Ray, if I'm running a little too long here, just let me know and I'll go a little
You're,
faster.
you're doing fine. We've got plenty of time.
All right, excellent. That's my favorite answer. So much so that I wrote a book about it. And in this book, which has received some really good reviews, and I just picked up a few new ones, and including Mr. Smith has read it and given me a very fine review for it. And the whole gist of it is that it's 1939, a band of heroes has to stop the German atomic bomb, or it's the end of civilization. A novel inspired by historical actual events and a lot of actual people, and a few made up along the way to give it some romance and a different level of interest than if it were just a conventional history book. E.L. Doctorow, the author of historical fiction such as Ragtime and so forth, he had a wonderful quote. He said, the difference between history, writing about history, and writing historical fiction is that when you write history, you tell what happened. When you write historical fiction, you tell how it felt when it happened. But this miscalculation, consequential for the Nazis, begs the question, how far did they actually get? After the war, only a small number of German nuclear scientists went on the public record. There were things like the farm hall interviews in England after the war of a group of captured German atomic scientists, and other people wrote books and so forth after the war. But it was in their best personal interest there, those German scientists, to downplay the program, their knowledge of it, and their support for it. I really didn't have much to do with that. But evidence exists that they built and tested a small atomic bomb in the last months of the war. It's amazing. In the Oppenheimer movie, in a key scene, the Manhattan Project leaders are assessing the status of what they know about the German atomic bomb project. And they're jumping around and kind of waving their arms and laughing. They don't know about carbon graphite. That belief persisted. But recent research and declassified documents, particularly by those 20 guys that I was referring to that Ray and I are now part of, those researchers around the world are showing that this was wrong. What kind of intelligence information existed during the war that Groves and Oppenheimer had access to? There was a meeting in German-occupied Copenhagen in September 41, where Heisenberg said something along the lines of everything was being done in Germany to develop atomic weapons. Well, that's September 1941, and that's a pretty scary comment, isn't it? So that got back from Dr. Bohr to America, and they were operating, as I'll say in a minute, a little bit more detailed coming right up, but this was pretty much the operating assumption for several years. The OSS, precursor to the CIA, sent an interesting individual named Mo Berg. He was a smart guy and American, but very fluent in German. He was sent to a conference in Zurich with Heisenberg in 1944, and Berg came back and said the Germans didn't know much about atomic weaponry. Fritz Kolbe, who was a top American spy in Germany, he smuggled out a lot of documents, but there was nothing in his cache of documents that talked about the atomic program in Germany. So confusion at this point. And this gentleman here, Paul Rosebaugh, a German spy, a German spying for the British. His code name was Griffin. He looks a little bit to me like James Bond. On various dates, he reported that Germans' project for a nuclear bomb was not successful. So it's confusing and really not much was known by the Americans. Dr. Arthur Haley Compton at the University of Chicago wrote several memos in the summer of 42 about the atomic work coming out of Germany. Here's one of his quotes. We've become aware that the threat of German fission bombs is even more imminent than we supposed. Now, this is summer of 42. If the Germans know what we know, and we dare not discount their knowledge, they should be dropping fission bombs us in 1943, a year before our bombs are planned to be ready. When she was wrong about that, they didn't happen for yet a year after 1944. But you can detect the fear. A few acknowledgments there. Here's an interesting letter, 1944. The Manhattan Project believed the German program was well ahead of them. This line of this letter to General Groves, we believe the enemy was considerably in advance of us in certain work. This is 1944. So at this point, we've got some scary information coming out of Germany from various places. We've got conflicting information coming from people like the Griffin and others. General Groves took this position. Unless and until we have positive knowledge to the contrary, we had to assume that the most competent German scientists and engineers were working on an atomic program with the full support of their government and the full capacity of German industry. Any other assumption would have been unsound and dangerous. That's what they had to operate with. So, did Germany just give up in 1941? Heisenberg's confused, but work goes on. 1942 in Leipzig, a German atomic machine goes critical but explodes. A guy was killed in that explosion. But further beyond this L1 reactor that blew up, by that time they had 5 tons of heavy water, by the way, in 1942, 8 pounds a day. How'd that happen? They continued on with L2, L3, and L4 reactors after that. Allies destroyed the heavy water plant in Norway in 1943, and Germany still pushed forward. That's a puzzling development or set of developments. New research and declassified documents revealed that there were 21 locations producing heavy water called Product 180 by 1945. Look at all these locations. There's the Norsk plant up there. It's been destroyed. Look at all these other locations throughout Germany, Austria, even down to Italy, their ally, producing heavy water. Near the end of the war, they had an underground site in Hagerloch, Germany. They had a heavy water moderated reactor for plutonium production, and they were trying to complete this. There's a pit here with the heavy water, and they lower down these cubes of purified uranium into the heavy water, and that eventually would promote the creation of plutonium. Seeing these pictures here in these illustrations. But at the same time, Germany was wasting their resources elsewhere. Thank God they were wasting their resources elsewhere. They had spent billions on their rocket programs, 10,000 people working on them in Peenemünde up on the Baltic coast. And by September of 1944, we're bombarding London with V 2 ballistic missiles, but with very little effect. Many of these landed in the farmland outside of London. Those that did land inside some of them dropped into the North Sea, some into the English Channel, and all told, probably 2,000 people were killed by V2s and V1s. The German rockets, however, the V1 and V2 cost the equivalent of around 50 billion in US dollars, 50% more than the cost of the Manhattan Project. They spent all that money on these ineffective ballistic missiles, but in the long run, as we'll see in a minute, they might not have been quite the waste that is indicated here had the war gone on a little longer. What would have happened, though, if the Nazis had put this kind of effort that they were putting these rockets into a Manhattan Project of their own and started 3 years before America? Some believe the Germans ran out of time. Remember what Jefferson said? There's a God in heaven. He's just and cares about what takes place in this world. I believe that God's hand entered into the picture here and it changed the course of mankind. This is the A4 rocket, which we called the V2 eventually. A4 started dropping these bombs 6 months before Germany's defeat. The German atomic bomb coming to America via the New York rocket. Here's a translated German document translated into Russian Cyrillic language, but it shows here's a V2 rocket. We just saw a picture of taking off. And the next picture shows wings added to the V2 over here. And that increases its range. And they take it and mount it up on top of a much larger first stage. As you can see, the V2 up on top there, and this first stage down below, and a pilot sitting in there, a space for a pilot to sit, and placement in the middle of the V2 up here about where that arrow is pointing, there would be a warhead. This was never tested. It was designed, and they were trying to test this big first stage down here. Here comes May of 1945, end of the war, end of project. But had Heisenberg's team had another 6 months to work, Hitler said, "May God forgive me for the things I must do in the last 2 weeks of this war." That would have been atomic bombs in America, atomic bombs on Moscow, the two Red Armies heading for Berlin. Had they been slowed down, they would have gotten their share of atomic weapons as well. And where does that leave us? What's the legacy of this bomb? Traditional beliefs that we've heard many times. I just mentioned Germany ran out of time. America won the race. This shortened the war against Japan by a few months. Well, that's terrific. Hundreds of thousands of Japanese were killed or maimed by the bombs. There are now tens of thousands of nuclear bombs with which to destroy the world. And that makes Oppenheimer, Truman, Groves, and America in general culpable of grievous crimes against humanity. Culpable for grievous crimes against humanity. That's the traditional belief. Is that true? Let's take a little bit closer look again. Get that magnifying glass out. I found this fascinating. I turned this up. Stalin stated to Roosevelt at the Yalta Conference, uh, which was taking place uh, well before the end of the war, that if Japan were not defeated before the end of August of 1945, Stalin said he would invade the major Japanese islands himself. The 4 million man Red Army would take all of Japan, Korea, China, and Southeast Asia. But in August of 1945, America was still, troops were only still on Guam, 1,000 miles away. And I think, Ray, you're being lined up to head over there to visit Guam and take a look over there. But that's where, as close as we were to Japan at that point, and all these regions there that I mentioned, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and China, would have been behind the Iron Curtain with the intervention of the of the uh, of the USSR and the deployment of the Red Army. The American invasion of Japan, called Operation Olympic and Operation Downfall, beginning in October of 1945, the second wave January 1946, it would have been 10 times the size of D-Day. This plan was going on very actively in 1944, 1945, and that we would have had to contend with all of the available Japanese military forces still around, but the resistance of a, quote, fanatically hostile population fighting door to door. The worst case scenario, published in July of 1945 by physicist William B. Shockley, predicted that at least 5 to 10 million Japanese, military and civilians, could die, with corresponding American casualties of up to 4 million. Who is William B. Shockley? What's he talking about? What's his authority? He happens to be the physicist who invented the transistor a couple of years later. That kind of changed our lives. There's no dummy. He'd been hired by the Pentagon to forecast what might happen in this Operation Olympic. And 300,000 American POWs were in the hands of the Japanese that would have been instantly executed had that invasion taken place. And for 80 years since and counting, no atomic bombs have ever been used in war. The potential for world destruction has prevented another world war so far. Many World War II veterans have said that the atomic bomb saved my life. Heard my father say that a few times. President Truman's choice, don't use this new weapon and sacrifice 500,000 Americans, or drop it and save our soldiers' lives, that was his Hobbes dilemma there, his Hobbes choice. What would you do? What if the American people had learned that Truman had a wonder weapon at his disposal in his hip pocket that would end the war, but he failed to use it? This is probably what would have happened to Truman. And he said after Nagasaki that if Japan did not accept the terms of surrender, they could expect a rain of ruin from the air, the likes of which had never been seen on this earth. A classic poker bluff. Harry S. Truman said, the plain fact is that civilization was saved in 1945 by the United Nations, not the United Nations we know of today, but meaning the Allies. The plain fact is that after the Nagasaki blast, there were no more American atomic bombs. There was insufficient plutonium and uranium to make any more bombs, probably until 1946. So had he lost his poker bluff, what would have happened? Perhaps the same outcome. But thank God Japan surrendered August 15th, 1945. However, we have continued nuclear tensions. Ever since, we've had mutually assured destruction. Mad. Mexican standoff. You kill me, I'll kill you. stopped another war for 8 decades and counting. But we have 13,000 nuclear warheads scattered around the world today. Many different, I think there are, at last count, 8 different uh, uh, countries that possess nuclear warheads. Some of them are atomic bombs only, some are hydrogen bombs that are 1,000 times more powerful. What about even countries like uh, Iran and so forth? They could probably flip a switch and in a week have their own atomic bombs if they don't have them already. So what's that bring us to? Ukraine, Taiwan, terror attacks. You get a small atomic bomb now for around 100 pounds in a suitcase. Slide it through the southern border or back it up there somehow in your luggage, or an accidental launch. In 2022, Mr. Biden said the nuclear Armageddon risk is the highest since 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. And in 2022, about the same time, Putin rattles his Satan II nuclear saber to hide the Russian sailors and its failures in the Ukraine war. So that's kind of what our situation is today, and I think we know the answer to that. And you can draw your own conclusions about whether we did the right thing in the Manhattan Project. I think you folks in Oak Ridge are a little bit biased, but on the other hand, we've got a lot of other people around the world that say that it was such a tragedy, but it happened nonetheless, and we live in that world today. In fall of 2025, Ray mentioned that I've got another book coming along. The SS called him Der Schatten, the Shadow, an American fugitive lost in Nazi Germany. He carries the responsibility to stop the Nazi atomic bomb. So this mock-up of a cover here gives you a little idea of what this will look like eventually when they publish. Simon & Schuster gets done with it, and chugging along there, getting the draft going out to them pretty soon, and it's going to be taking off from the point where my current book leaves off, which was January 1941, and our heroic protagonist moves on from that point and finds himself immersed in the heart of Germany, going around trying to stop the atomic bomb and trying to transmit American information back to the Americans. And so I think it's going to be a thrilling thing. So far, it's looking very good. I want to thank you all for being here today and listening to this presentation. It's been my pleasure to give these insights in your direction. And again, I'd invite you to contact me at umish918@yahoo.com. I talk with Ray at from time to time, and he can pass on any questions you might have that you think of tomorrow or next week, or just contact me directly at umish918. This book is available possibly at your Barnes and Noble if you have one there in Oak Ridge, but it's available on Amazon.com, also BarnesandNoble.com and Walmart.com, other places too. And if you happen to get a hold of a copy of it on Amazon, please leave me a review on there, particularly if you like it. If you don't like it, don't leave a review. But I'd love it if you would leave a review if you pick up a copy. Also, if you happen to buy one, I think the American Museum for Science and Energy may have the book in stock there. They did at one time. And if you happen to pick one up other than Amazon, you can still write an Amazon review, and they will still handle it, even though it didn't come from them. And I also have a website and blog, thearmageddonsecret.com. So again, thank you for listening and tuning in to the Zoom call here today. And at this point, if you've got any questions, I'll be listening intently.
Go ahead and stop your share, if you will.
All right, let's see. Stop share right there. Did that do it?
Very good. Now, if any of you have any questions for Robert, now's the time to just unmute yourself and ask away. Okay?
I've had some folks come to my presentations about the book, of which has been this will be number 46, by the way, that I've done in television in Michigan, a couple radio stations in Michigan, and various bookstores and and libraries and various things. A lot of times people will come to those presentations already with book in hand and tabs and the book and dog-eared pages, and they'll bombard me with a lot of questions, and I get probably most of them right, but some people are very schooled in this area and ask some very tough questions. So I'm a bit relieved that you folks in the center of the heart of the project aren't asking me these hard questions.
Oh, we may have a question or two for you. So let's give them a little bit more time to chime in. Any of you that
Absolutely.
have a question, just unmute yourself and ask away.
And I think there's another Dr. Ryder Zoom call, Ray, coming up in another 2 or 3 weeks. I think I saw a notice on that, so I'm looking forward to that again.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's coming up as well.
These are very interesting guys,
Mhm.
and I'm just to continue to be amazed at the amount of work that Dr. Ryder has put into accumulating his facts and figures.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah,
Mhm. Where will your book go? How far up will you take us?
this next book will go up to the explosion at the desert there in at the Trinity explosion. Our hero, I can't kind of a little bit of a spoiler here because he runs into a lot of dangers, but he survives to get over there to July the 16th of 1945, and he's able to actually witness the fruits of the labor over there, and that will bring us to the end.
Well, without asking you to give away too much information, will you also be dealing with what was happening in Germany, and if in fact there was uh, any explosion of an atomic test there?
Absolutely. So in the book, if you've read the first book, and
Yeah,
at the end of the book, the uh, the people there in January 1941 are the German underground folks there are elated because they feel like they've stopped the atomic bomb. And in the last paragraph or so, they say we have the description that they have stopped the German atomic bomb, and isn't that all wonderful? We stopped the bomb, and the thing is they've stopped it for now, and so off it goes. And our protagonist, Mr. Drake, he winds up having to escape into Germany, and he becomes a fugitive roaming around Germany and getting insight here and there. But there's something going on here in Auschwitz, or there's something going on another area, and he goes to these various places over a period of a couple of years, traveling from place to place, job to job, trying to get information back to the United States with extreme difficulty. And at the end, he's able to transmit information onto them, but he then has to get out of the country after some harrowing experiences and
hmm.
winds up back in the United States. So,
Okay. Sue,
so
do
he's
you
pretty
have a
good.
question for Robert?
I I do indeed.
Good.
I'm curious if we were the only two countries, Germany and the United States, working on an atomic bomb, and why would that kind of spontaneously happen that we would both end up with this same project at the same
So
time? Just
yeah, those are great questions. Thank you. The first thing is to answer the first part of it. America and Germany were the only ones really with a viable project. The Russians were stealing information from the Manhattan Project and channeling it back to Russia, but they really didn't have an effective program going on uh, until later. And then they could put together all the stolen American information and got themselves an atomic bomb by 1949. It was a dead clone of the Fat Man bomb, and the Japanese had an embryonic program going on, which it appears that the Germans were feeding some information. There you go, right there. Yeah, and they were doing some things also. And at the very end of the war, the Germans were attempting to send some uranium and some scientists via submarine all the way over to Japan, but that submarine called the U-234, which is kind of interesting because it almost sounds like an isotope of uranium. U-234 surrendered and headed to Halifax and to the United States, and they were going to be feeding more information to oh yes, yeah, the critical mass. Uh,
If you want to learn more about that submarine U-234, this is the book by Carter Heydrich that gives as much detail as anyone about it. And there's
yeah,
also information on YouTube if you want to watch videos. There's actual you'll have to
okay.
hold it right now.
I have to hold it
You,
right about
you
here.
have the same
Anyway,
book.
there it is. Okay, that's my copy.
There is a video on YouTube, U-234, that actually has the man who got that uranium and sent it to Oak Ridge, actually saying what he did, how he took the uranium, and it first went to Washington, D.C., and then it went to Oak Ridge. So, yes, there was obviously work being done in Germany, something being done in Japan, and Russia knew that there was something there, but as Robert said, they didn't get their start on it until after Klaus Fuchs gave them the information about Fat Man by giving them the actual drawings and of the design of Fat Man. And that's why Stalin told his scientists, just replicate this bomb. And then is whether or not there was another spy, if you remember, and I have the book on it as well. This one is the book is called The Sleeper Agent by Anne Hagedorn, and it's about George Koval, who was a spy that was in Oak Ridge. And I'm convinced that by Klaus Fuchs giving Stalin the information on Fat Man, the plutonium bomb, and by George Koval giving him the information about how difficult it was to separate the uranium 235 to make a uranium bomb, I'm convinced that that is what caused Stalin to insist on just building the plutonium bomb and not trying to actually enrich the uranium like we did in Oak Ridge for the little boy bomb.
Consider that there are four ways to make an atomic bomb, right? There's enrichment, and then there's plutonium, and there's three different ways to do the enrichment, if not more. And so America, General Groves said when this was presented to him in 1942, so there's four ways to do this. They all require big industrial investment. He said, do them all.
Yeah.
And so off they went, and all the four ways. Imagine if you're in Stalin's position, and the Americans have already invested all this money and energy trying to figure out, the right one, that's the easiest way. And he said, well, we'll just take that one and we'll pursue that. He had a tremendous benefit from this stolen information, Ray.
You're exactly right. The fact that General Groves decided to go after every possibility to get it is probably one of the major reasons that we were so successful. In that
Absolutely.
he looked at the electromagnetic separation at Y12, the gaseous diffusion at K25, the thermal diffusion at S50, and then the plutonium through the X10 graphite reactor. And then later on, the plutonium came from Hanford, Washington, at the reactors built up there on the Columbia River. But stop and think about the central place that Oak Ridge played in all of that. All of those methods for separating uranium was done here in Oak Ridge. And the proof that you could produce plutonium from a uranium reactor was done at the graphite reactor at what's now the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The only
Absolutely.
system that did not get pursued that is being used today, or one of the systems being used today, is the centrifuge. And I don't know all the details, but I'm convinced that in all likelihood, during the 1940s, there was not a capability to spin that centrifuge as rapidly as we can do it today. And it is a more efficient way than, of course, the electromagnetic separation process was a batch process, very inefficient. And then the gaseous diffusion process was also quite slow. So I think the centrifuge process that's being used around the world today is probably the most effective mechanism that we have. There was a competition back, I guess, in the 80s with the atomic laser separation process and the centrifuge, and the atomic laser process actually won that competition. But I think we've gone back to the centrifuge processes primarily. That's what we're using in the plant being built at Portsmouth. The centrifuges are being built in Oak Ridge. And then we have other industry that's coming into Oak Ridge. The Orano company, which is a French company, is going to build a huge centrifuge plant very near the old K25 site, right at the junction of Highway 58 and 95. And it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar investment. So the nuclear renaissance that's happening with Oak Ridge right in the very center of it, having the small modular reactors being built now at the Kairos Power location where the old K33 building used to be. And not only that, Tennessee Valley Authority is building small modular nuclear reactors at the old Clinch River breeder reactor site, again out on the west end of Oak Ridge on the river there. And then we have the TriSoX fuel fabrication in the Horizon Center, and even have a fusion energy company, Type 1 Energy, going into the old Bull Run steam plant here in Oak Ridge. So right now, Oak Ridge is at the center of this nuclear renaissance in a way that is amazing to think about what's going to be happening there in the next few years, and actually already started now with the governor providing $65 million to form a council, advisory council on nuclear energy. And I think you're beginning to already see results from that now. Any other questions for Robert?
Well,
Surely.
thanks to all of you, and I hope we all have a.
Wait a minute. Robert, wait a minute. We have one over here.
Oh,
Robert, we're not able to understand you for some reason. Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please ask your question.
Okay. Some years ago, I heard a statement that the Germans really didn't have a good concept of an atomic bomb, that their idea essentially was like dropping a nuclear reactor. Is that wrong? Did they have really a good idea of what an actual bomb was like?
Oh yeah, very definitely. There's a lot of there's actually we saw a patent filed by a German patent filed by one of the scientists in the war there, showing the implosion process. They were actually quite expert at developing the implosion system for compressing the plutonium into critical mass, and they were testing that, and they had that down. They were doing really well. They were probably well ahead of us. I think one of the documents I saw from during the research showed that they were already researching the explosive lens concept back in the 1930s, and they had an expert uh, who was knowledgeable in that whole thing of the explosive lenses and the implosion process. He was chugging along there in the 1940s, early 40s there on the road to this atomic bomb. They had a very clear understanding of what that would take.
One of
So
the,
the sort of fat boy mechanism rather than fat man mechanism rather than little boy.
Yeah, they understood that the projectile method wouldn't work with plutonium. It would wind up with premature ignition, efficient, and wouldn't work. So that they immediately turned to the implosion method, and and they were well along in the pathway there. Ray, you were going to say something about that?
yeah, in critical mass, Carter Heydrich notes that there was on that submarine those ignition capability for implosion. He
Yeah.
indicates that that was included in the material that was being sent to Japan, and is in fact what he says, Carter says, is where we learned how to build the implosion bomb of Fat Man. How we got the ignition capability was from that information that was in that German sub.
And I think that if they were only coming from Heydrich's book, well, maybe we'd be a little skeptical, but we're getting this information from a lot of other sources and documented information that shows that that's the case, as Ray's stating it.
Yeah. Any other questions for Robert? All right. Robert, I really appreciate you being with us. And I want to remind you that all of you that I would love any ideas that you have for our next session that I will teach again if asked to, and we will include anything that you'd like to have included in the next session. And I'll put this video up on YouTube, and I'll send a link to everyone that signed up for the class. So thank you all very much for being with us today. And Robert, appreciate so much you taking the time to share information about your research and tell us about your upcoming book.
Thank you very much, and happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you.
Yes. Thank you very much, guys.